Welcome to Bay Area Women's Theater Festival Amplify Artist Conversations. I am Erin Merritt, and I'm one of the instigators on the Amplify team. With theaters closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our Amplify 24-hour performance event, which we had originally scheduled for Brava Theater for April 18th and 19th, with 70 or more performances by over 200 artists, is on hold for our live event, of course. But we refuse to allow the need for social distancing to keep us from amplifying the voices and the artistry of the amazing women, non-binary, and trans artists that are signed up to do this live event when it happens. We are taking two different measures to counteract this attempted stoppage. One, we're going to be doing about 3 hours worth of programming on the 18th. So check out our website for those details as they become available. That will be soon. We are at Bay Area Women's Theater Festival.com, and that's theater with an R-E, theatre. Bay Area Women's Theater Festival.com. And the other thing that we're doing is bringing some of the artists that are set to perform in Amplify to you in a more personal and one-on-one way by allowing them to speak to us and to you here on our podcast. So today we're in conversation with Susan Jane Harrison, my friend, who is an actor and playwright. And if you want to check out her work, you can find it at SusanJaneHarrison.com. SusanJaneHarrison.com. All right, Susan Jane, welcome. Thank you for coming to talk to me today. How are you doing?
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Well, we are sheltering in place as much as we are able. We're a household of 14-year-old boy, 20-year-old eldest son, my partner, myself, and then my mother lives in the back cottage, so I have to do her shopping, and I'm going to clean her house later today. And it's all very bizarre, as it is for many of us. I've definitely struggled with some depression, and I think there's some pressure people put on themselves to then be terribly creative if you're not working and you're at home. But also I find that kind of the family dramas and just there's a lot of attention needed interpersonally to get through this. And I think it's a great opportunity actually I'm finding it's like a great opportunity to work through some things in the family. Nothing horrifically major, but I'm just really using it as an opportunity for growth, shall we say. But it's been difficult, as it is for everyone. And I think it's difficult each situation has its own difficulty. I'm an introvert, which you won't get in this interview from me as I'm going to be talking a lot, but in a house with many people, people who are on their own, that has its own thing that's challenging, I'm sure. So there we are.
Yeah, indeed. Well, and I think I was just reading an article yesterday that said the parents are not doing all right. And I think there's that added challenge of being a parent right now, of trying to, present the strongest possible, or strong isn't the right word, but to present oneself in a way that helps your kids do what they need to do, rather than being able to have all the time that you would need to be your own authentic self, because you're trying to help them out, and then there's school, and then there's the days that
really
there's no school.
So, that's really true. And I'm kind of I'm the head of my household, and it's my house. I'm the one who makes the decisions about my kids and my house. And so there's, negotiating that goes on around that. But I also, my life as a parent has always been like, sometimes it feels like it's just damage control. It's like, it'd be great if I could just think of myself and what works for me and what works for my integrity. But then I'm managing other people and knowing how to get the best out of them in the situation, how to protect them the best I can. And that doesn't always mean being really strict about things. Sometimes it means particularly with a 20-year-old, basically. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's been very full on.
I'm
So no, I
realizing,
have not been sitting there reworking one of the plays that is kind of on my list to rework. Not
right,
as yet.
right.
I've been
Yeah,
cooking a lot because it feels like that's the only thing I can do.
right, right. I think
Yeah.
parents have less time now than they did almost. But yeah, this is making me realize we need to do a whole separate
Right.
podcast on parenting, and then also on and especially being that that sandwich generation, right, where you're also taking care of parents.
Oh
All right, so
yes, yeah, yeah. I
we'll do
didn't
that
even
later.
mention my mother. There's much. There's like so much more to say. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm also
yeah.
shopping for my mother and a couple other people right now. So yeah, I'm like, okay, let me go out into the germs and try not to get anything and deliver food everywhere that I can. And oops, I forgot to get milk. Oh God, I'm not going back out. We're doing without milk
Right,
today.
exactly.
Anyway, okay, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you, and we're also here to talk about your art. So let's take this moment and talk to me a little bit about your journey of finding your voice, using your voice within your art form, and maybe even about how that's changed since becoming a parent, if you want.
Well, yes, I think for me the most striking thing, and it comes up in my solo show, Mind the Gap, which is part of Amplify. That's why I'm here. Um, is actually that I was brought up sort of very free to be you and me, and actually
Mhm,
had an
mhm,
idea that men and women there wasn't really any equality because of the um, good job my parents did in many ways. Of course, I can see now that there was a lot of internalized inequality in their relationship, but it wasn't obvious. My dad did most of the cooking. He was very tidy. There were never sort of arguments about who's doing what. My parents were self-employed and worked together frequently. And nothing in that upbringing prepared me to marry somebody from a very different culture than myself, different language, which he is from Guatemala. And although in my own family, I was born in England. I have an English parent. I have my dad's family has been in Berkeley since before the 1906 earthquake, since the gold rush, actually. So basically, I had a lot of differences and cultural differences in my own family, but just not as obvious, right?
mhm, mhm,
So then marrying someone from Latin America from a very traditional background, um, and then having a 17-year marriage that was actually very oppressive, and very challenging. And long periods where I didn't work, I didn't marry somebody who understood, had any relationship with theatre or direct relationship with the arts that I was involved with. And it was very difficult for him to support. Um,
mhm,
and he didn't particularly want to, I think. And that wasn't binary. It wasn't that there was never any support, but I ended up becoming a stucco contractor, running a small business, loving in some ways being an entrepreneur, which I guess was kind of in my background as well. But doing things I mean, my marriage took me into a life I'd never even dreamed of. And very much
mhm,
doing my art during that time was very, very difficult. And there were periods of years where I didn't do it. And since I'm assuming most people listening to this don't know me, I trained at RADA in London. I acted in England. I came back here, having been to high school at Berkeley High. And so the idea that I would have gone and done that in London and then worked in London, and I had a play produced on BBC Radio that I'd written, and then just give it up is kind of heartbreaking. But I did keep it going. I wrote at night. I did all that stuff that women do anyway, even when they have a more supportive partner. Um,
mhm,
So I can tell Erin that I can use your help in focusing me. Okay, voice. I'm thinking about what you said in the beginning. So
Yeah.
actually, what I
Yes.
wanted to say,
How did you?
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, how maybe let's break this into before the marriage too. Talk to us about growing up and developing your voice and going to RADA and getting to that BBC moment, because that's kind of an interesting path that again most Americans haven't had. And so, like, maybe give us just a little snapshot of that, and then we'll pick up where you left off.
Okay, so I didn't hear all of what you just said,
Oh,
but
I'm
I
sorry.
think that's okay. You were breaking up a bit, but I think I'm going to bring this. It sounds like we're on the same page. I'm going to bring this back to voice, which was that I entered that situation with a lack of awareness. I already entered the situation without as strong a sense of my own voice as I might have had, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So, although my background was the way it was, obviously I was not growing up in a world in which men and women had achieved social equality or relationship equality. I just thought that I
Right.
was. So, as I think you probably know, I practice Nichiren Buddhism. I practiced since I was in my early 20s. That's like half my life. And part of practicing Buddhism is really taking ownership of anything that's in one's life. And there's also a central concept of turning poison to medicine. So the way that I view
Hmm.
this is that I do not regret. I mean, I have two boys that I adore. I learned so much from my marriage. It's very much now entered my art. I learned Spanish. I became part of a community I never had been part of before. So these are all great gifts. And I also think that without having my voice very actively oppressed, I don't know if I would have been able to recognize, I would have kind of just stayed at a kind of a status quo. That's how I frame this.
Uh-huh.
So through that experience, the desire to bring my voice out became so much stronger. You kind of have to see the oppression to be able to fight against it. And I mean, I'm not making a
Yeah.
case for oppression, but for me, this is how I take this and feel like anything that's in my life I've chosen. I chose this for a reason, and
Hmm.
it certainly made me very much aware of my voice. And even before, um, the strongest part of my training, so before my marriage, when I was at RADA, that the most impactful part of my training was the voice work. And it's something that
Hmm.
I also teach and went on to teach. And I have individual students. And the work always comes down, they're mostly women, though not always. The work always comes down to the bigger voice. So both the psychological voice, the physical voice, that I don't see a separation. It's very connected. What's happening in our bodies, what's
Hmm.
happening in our minds. So um, I
And
have taken the experiences
can
I
you
had. Yeah.
oh, sorry, can you expand on that a little bit for people who are not theater makers? Um, how do you talk to the students you have about what we call finding a voice, right? But about the connection between their voice and their body on a psychological level and
Well,
a physical level.
so we start with voice exercises. The work that I do is Linklater based, although not exclusively. And there's a lot of research out there right now about breath, and that also kind of engages with meditative practices, right? So we now know what the breath does for the body and for the nervous system. So in
Hmm.
starting to address voice just from breathing exercises that then come into sound. We come on to sound after a number of other things that we do in the exercise. Students already experience how differently they feel in their body.
Hmm.
And then they start to notice tension in certain areas of the body. And then it just naturally, there's natural opportunities for me to investigate, not in an invasive way, but to just draw out what the student thinks that may be about. And we have check-in conversations at the beginning of small groups, um, and people just start sharing. They experience it. So I'm always bringing back, what do you feel in your body, um, and encouraging students to reflect on any connections they may make around what that may also mean for them psychologically. I'm not a counselor, so I'm not approaching it in that way,
Mhm.
but it's also um, all the work that I do from voice into text has a psychophysical component. So I suppose, to explain to people to whom this is entirely new, our culture tends to approach things very intellectually from with a head-led approach, and that's also happened in the US with acting training, where we think about what
Mhm.
is the psychology of the character. My training did not privilege that intellect over the other modalities. So it didn't privilege um, instinct, physicalization, what's happening in the body. It didn't underprivilege those things, right? These are all different tools. The actor is the entire instrument. So if all of these things, my how my body feels, my emotions and my mind, my intellect, my thoughts, are on a kind of an ellipses, you can enter acting work and even self-development work, I think, from any one of those points. So if we're
Mhm.
used to entering discovery about a character or about ourselves from the point of intellect, we can as easily, and it does depend, each person has their easier way of entry, right? We're all
Right.
different.
Of
But
course.
you can enter kinetically, physically, what's happening in my body. Um, and so, from an acting perspective, sometimes a lot of the exercises I do are about how to engage emotion through the body instead of intellectually, I need to feel this emotion.
Mhm.
um, Engaging the breath of that emotion in the body, because when we have certain emotions, we breathe in certain ways. Sometimes you can simply mechanically do something with your body that then brings you into that more emotive, expressive place. So it's how to enter any of the work we're doing personally or theatrically from different points, not just from the intellect. The intellect's very important. Once we've had an experience, we can then bring our mind to it and analyze it. But it's starting with the physical experience before we start with the intellectual experience, if that makes sense.
Well, it does to me, of course, because I also love that work. And I just want to take a moment because even though you're not doing entirely Kristen Linklater work, I do want to kind of call her out because she is a real leader. She also started the first all female Shakespeare company in the country many years ago. And if anybody wants to know more about her, you can find her information at linklatervoice.com. That's LINKLATER voice.com. She's pretty fascinating. So okay, so you are coming from a place of voice and breath work, and metaphysically and physically, and finding your voice, or refinding your voice when coming out of this relationship. And how did you find your way to Mind the Gap?
Well, when I was doing part of my journey back to my work was to do an MFA. So I did that at UC Davis. They had, I'm not sure where they're at with it now, but they had at the time one of the only MFA programs for mid-career professionals. So it was geared for somebody like me who'd already trained, who was already practicing. And Mind the Gap came out of my thesis exploration. And like many things in my life, I don't think I do this anymore. I now know better. But I would start with, well, I would never do X. And then as soon as I say I would never do X, I go, well, why wouldn't you do X? And then, and then that investigation leads me to go, well, I should do X then. So
Right.
in
I want
this,
to, and I want to point this out too because I think this is a very theater specific way of looking at things that I love, and that um, even if it is only a part of our process, because so much of the public tends to think of as they define themselves as things that they would never do. And I think one of the things most of us are trained in theater to think is you can't say I would never do or the character would never do X. You have to think under what circumstances would the character do X.
Right.
And it's a
Very good
real
point.
reorientation thinking of oneself as a mutable being full of
Yes.
all possibilities, both good and bad.
And I think in just in the last sort of 3 years, I've had many things like that where, because of course I'm having a bit of a renaissance in my life, and so
Mhm.
just discovering all the things I will do that I thought I wouldn't do. One of them was, so this was I would never be on the toilet on stage. And I went, then I'd better do it, because
Yeah.
so so I developed this thesis piece that was an exploration of roles and somehow was happening on a toilet. Now, I didn't actually go to the toilet with my own body on the toilet, but I did a scenario in which I was sitting in a toilet, in which one character thought she was being private and the other was like, no, we're in front of an audience. So that had a different name, but Mind the Gap came out of that piece. And in the end, I don't use a toilet now. I have a chair, and it's very much set up that I do take my pants down as if I am going to the toilet. But we're actually the two of the characters within me are arguing about it. And one of them says, how can you expect them to suspend their disbelief if you don't? So it's all about sitting on a chair now where one is pretending they're going to the toilet and the other isn't, right? So it there's no doubt the audience is very clear that nothing is actually going to happen, but it
Right.
becomes a way of discussing public and private, and it's um, how two different characters experience something. And these are the characters within me. One in this case is the actor, um, and the other is the dame, sort of the performance artist, but she's a dame of the British theatre, which is completely unrealistic. Like, how many performance artists are going to become dames? But
Not enough, apparently.
no. But so Mind the Gap is all about it. It was the toilet. It was about my desire to hide in the bathroom. Um, as a mother, the only place I could be alone, as somebody who had a partner who might be shouting and banging on the door, the place I might hide is the bathroom. This all comes out of the piece.
Mhm.
And then Mind the Gap is something many people know is set on the London Underground. And it just suddenly, so the piece initially, once I decided with the very original piece that I was going to be on the toilet, it all became about how American public toilets, so there's a line, American public toilets have something in common with the London Underground, Mind the Gap, because there's these gaps in the doors.
Mhm.
Um, and in England and in former Commonwealth countries like New Zealand, where I recently performed the show, you've got these beautiful public toilet doors. Sometimes they're almost like floor to ceiling. You can't see anything. You can really be private in public when you go to a loo. But in the
Mhm.
US, as you know, there's these really gappy doors, which I think are completely counterintuitive to the culture. Um, so Mind the Gaps kind of, it's the gaps between cultures too. So in Mind the Gap, I brought my personal self to the stage in a way I haven't done in any other piece. My other pieces are plays for other people. I have been in some of them. Sometimes I'm not, but
Mhm.
I'm very well obscured behind an ensemble play. You don't know what in that is from my life and what isn't. In this case, I'm actually me on stage, and then I'm some of the characters within me. And I
Mhm.
talk about real events, and a lot of it is about just cultural gaps between. I bring my American self on stage, which I haven't done very directly,
Mhm.
as well as my English self, as well as me speaking Spanish, and what, as someone not of that culture, but as someone with children who are um, of that culture and of my own cultures, and it's and some kind of things that are very difficult to talk about. And so then the gappy door really helped me with that. Pretending that I'm hiding behind a gappy door and metaphorically letting people peer through the gaps. So there's one part towards the end where I simply say words, and I frame that in the piece as, you know, you can keep talking about this. One character is encouraging the other character. You can be safe behind the gappy door. Let them peer through the gaps. And it was actually my current partner, who's extremely supportive, um, who came up with that idea that I could just say words that really mean something to me and will convey a lot to the audience, but the details, I don't have to talk about the details. So
Mm-hmm.
to culminate, I don't know, it feels like this period of voice has just been really important. And I think I have, because part of it is, for me, it has been around partnership. That is certainly not the only way that someone can receive support.
Right.
Um, but for me, it's been a real revolution from having one kind of situation to then having someone in my life who's assisted me with my work, made work possible by his own involvement, and then introducing me, and then taking care of one of my children while I was working in New Zealand for months.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a real new world for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would say to young actors, playwrights, women artists, anyone really, that if partnership is important and art is important, and this doesn't even have to be art, it could just be work that you love, that you're passionate about, really looking at the kinds of relationships you're building. They do not just have to be partnerships, it could be a whole range of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
But really looking, does this nourish me in my full self? Is this person really rooting for me and also willing to support me to enable this to happen?
Yeah.
Um, and usually that comes with mutuality as well, right? But
Right.
just not taking that lightly, not thinking it will all work out later, but really making sure that the people we surround ourselves with can be part of our community. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, all of this is making me, so, I've, full disclosure, I've worked with Susan Jane on couple of projects, directed her twice, once in a show of her own. And, so Susan Jane, knowing that, I have not seen Mind the Gap except for a little tiny snippet that you sent in as a sample. And this is just making me absolutely like jumping out of my seat wanting to see it immediately. So thank you.
Yeah.
And I cannot wait until we can open the theaters up and get you in there. But why did you, I know why I wanted you to be part of Amplify. What do you think, why did you want to be part of Amplify? Does, how does Mind the Gap show up differently in that context as opposed to in just sort of a more general fringe, or
Right.
what's the connection there?
Um, can you hear me, by the way? I'm just seeing. Yeah.
I can hear you well.
Um, well, it's so much. Uh, it's so personal, and I am a woman, and so much of what is happening in it, my experience is so much about being a woman in the time I grew up in, and within the different cultures that I'm experiencing. And um, it felt like it just was an obvious fit in that particular way, in a within an environment that is all about supporting um, diverse voices. Um, and I know that can be non-binary as well. So I it just felt, and it felt important to be doing it locally. It still feels really scary to me. I mean, I think um, it is so personal. And as I say, I've never done anything that personal. And therefore, though, it felt like this would be the appropriate place for it.
Mm.
Because a lot of women, I've seen a lot of women's work um, that's really daring and really empowered me,
Mhm.
and made me feel when we hear each other's voices, we hear our own.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I just want to sit with that for one moment. A lot of I've been interviewing a lot of people here, and we're often talking about the fact that we, as women or as non-binary people or trans people, we've gone and we've all seen Hamlet. We've all identified with Hamlet in some way, or if not
Mm-hmm.
Hamlet, somebody else, right? We've all identified. We have a lot of practice identifying with people who aren't speaking our stories, and
Mm-hmm.
so we know that that others coming to see our stories will also identify with our stories. And so for me, this project is about both of those things. About our stories get to be up there. We are taking our time. We are claiming our time on these stages, and other people get to listen now, but they are also going to have that joy. So the women that are there, the non-binary people that are there, the trans people that are there are going
Mm-hmm.
to have their stories told and be able to listen to their story unhidden by anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's also going to be this great joy for the binary people, for the men, for the, all the people who have not had that opportunity to listen as much to other people's stories, because they will
Mm-hmm.
also find, this is speaking to me. Oh, I do identify with this. And I think that's very freeing and brings us together very much as well. So, um, obviously, my little soapbox there, sorry about that, but part of the reason
Oh,
that
I
we're
think it's
creating.
great. I think that's it. Yeah.
Um, so I want to kind of wrap this up a little bit by saying that the Bay Area Women's Theater Festival is in existence because we want to highlight and obviously amplify the voices of women, non binary, and trans performers and theater makers. And part of what we're doing with that is also to just talk about entertainers in general in this time where people are stuck at home and desperate for entertainment. We want to say, hey, we are here for you, and remind everyone that artists take many, many years to create their work, both their decades and decades of ongoing training, and the time that it takes to write these pieces, and the time it takes to rehearse these pieces. And we're here for you, but we are also needing to pay our rents and our mortgages and feed our children and feed ourselves. And I want to make it clear that Bay Area Women's Theater Festival is paying each of its interviewees for their time. But we also want to offer the listeners an opportunity to chip in uh, and support these spectacular artists as well. And you can support Susan Jane Harrison and of course, now I can't find that. I think it is Susan dash Jane dash Harrison on Venmo. Is that
Yes,
right?
that's
Okay.
correct.
So again, thank you so much for joining us. You can find out more about Susan Jane's work at susanjaneharrison.com.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And you can support her work by sending some funds to her on Venmo at Susan-Jane-Harrison. Thank you so much. It was such a joy to talk to you today.
Thank you,
And I'm looking
Erin.
forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, me too. It's been great.